All right, we're at episode 12,
Well,
and we're talking about the famous green banner on LinkedIn is where we're starting today. So I think we've had
to
like some ebb and flows,
banner
like
or
we were
not to
saying
banner.
earlier. Yeah. We're into banner or not to banner. That is the question. And we have, I don't know, I think my views have shifted throughout the time. So I'm glad that we're kind of talking through this based on the post that you sent that was talking about what was it? A hiring manager said if someone has a green banner, they don't want to talk
They
to
don't
that
want to
candidate,
talk.
I think was the gist of it.
Yeah, it was that. I think the original recruiter was saying that they, if they put forward a candidate who was qualified, met all the criteria, was a good candidate for a role, that the hiring manager, I guess, would go look at their LinkedIn profile, and if they had the green banner of saying open to work, that they wouldn't want to talk to them, which is something that I suspected was happening, but I wasn't 100% sure. And that sort of validated it. I mean, it's case by case. That's one example. But then the original recruiter who posted it, I think she was saying that, a lot of times recruiters who don't have LinkedIn Recruiter like to use the banner as a way to find people who are looking for work if they're
Yeah.
just straight sourcing. Because there is a way to put on your profile that you're open to work privately just so recruiters can see it, which I have done that. I've never used the open to work banner, and I've struggled with that. Like, should I use it? Should I not? It's a very complicated thing. I don't know why, but I think we all know that in talent acquisition, it's a very judgmental space in a lot of ways. And hiring managers can be very difficult in what they will rule in or rule out on a candidate. So I think it's just one of those things where, people are a little reluctant to use it because it might look like they're desperate in some ways, but it still doesn't make any sense to me. So,
Yeah, I
what are
agree
your
with that.
thoughts?
Because when I think about it, I think it's good because people are open to work or looking for work. They don't have a job right now. And in my mind, whether it be as a hiring leader or as a recruiter sitting in the seat, not that people who are working don't want another job. They might be miserable. They might be all of those things. But for me personally, I would rather hire someone who isn't working, right? And give them an opportunity that has
Right.
a skill set to do the job. And I know that's very controversial because you have people who just target people who are working, right? And say if they're working, that
Right.
must be a top talent, they're being retained. So now let's just take that person that's doing this role at XYZ company. But that's not always necessarily the case, too, based on the way the chips fall, is what I'll say. So I just think I like your word bonkers when you say bonkers. So I just think it's bonkers
Bonkers.
or bananas. Like when you say bananas too, that people have that mindset and even think like that. It just, again, we're not in an economy and an environment that we were in. Let's say it's, I'm going to go even pre-COVID. I'm going to say, let's say it's 2019, 2018. We're not even in that type of environment where the majority of people who are in the professional space, let's call it professional space, are working. Where you would say, okay, I need to go
Right.
recruit from a competitor, those types of things. We had our target lists back in the day, right? Our organizational mapping we did and said, okay, we need to go find someone who's doing whatever it might have been and getting those org charts and saying, let's target people who are at that company working. We know they're successful and doing it. I feel like we're in such a different environment, in a different landscape that I just really don't understand the mindset behind saying if someone has a green banner up, they're less valuable than someone who is currently working. It blows my mind.
I agree. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, I mean, the intention behind it was good. I think
Yeah.
LinkedIn deployed it during COVID, right? When so many people were looking for work. So I think the intention was a good, positive one. But maybe there's some sort of leftover prejudice against people from that. I don't know. I mean, I've seen a lot of job postings recently where people are saying they're looking to hire right away. I know for a while I wasn't seeing on applications like what day can you start. I've started seeing more of that
Mm.
lately. I don't know if it's just chance or a coincidence or not, but um where companies are actually looking for people to start more quickly. Because if you have a person who has a job and they go through a lengthy hiring process, and then they have to then give 2 weeks notice, that just continues a very long process to get somebody into a role. And if you
Yeah.
have a role that is sitting empty, that's costing your organization more money. So realistically, you should be looking at people who are out of work because they can get to work much quicker. They're going to be more available for interviews. They're going to, there's a lot of pluses to hiring somebody who's currently out of work. They're probably more likely to not have upcoming vacation planned, or things like that that are going to inhibit their ability to work right away, or work through the summer months, or whatever the case may be. So I think there is that, and I think that people who are unemployed and coming to a new job may be more, and I don't know if there's any research on this, I'm just saying hypothetically, it sort of seems like people would be more inclined to work harder and try to prove themselves more in a certain way than somebody who's coming from another company, who may be directly from another company, not without a period of time in between. But that's just sort of my experience. So
Yeah.
I think it's really complicated. And I like, I mean, I hadn't thought about it from the perspective of like, if a recruiter doesn't have LinkedIn Recruiter, but they can see that, then that's going to be able to help them. But again, and it's that thing of social media. Like, what do you put out in social media that you're willing to see a future or current employer see? And that becomes really complicated. So you can have your Facebook, private or whatever, but then if you have this banner on LinkedIn and you're actively looking, you're letting people know that you're looking, you're putting that out there. Why shouldn't you have it? And why
Yeah.
should that engage you?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like if I'm searching, okay, let's say I'm interviewing people and I go out there and I want to see their LinkedIn profile, or maybe it's sent to me. I think if you export it, does it show up? I haven't tried it. Probably does, right? If you have a banner up there, would it show on export? So let's say it does.
I mean, like it's a resume download, like
Yeah,
downloading a
like you know how
LinkedIn
you can
profile.
PDF file the LinkedIn profiles?
Yeah, I don't know that it does, but I should try it and see
Yeah,
because I
I,
don't.
I'm curious because, okay, if it does show an export, we could probably even do it really quick and do a test. I could turn
Because I
to
don't think
my
it shows your picture and the banner's over your picture. So I don't know if it would show up somewhere else on your
Yeah,
profile.
right. If it says open to work on there, and then you're sending those profiles to the hiring manager and they can see the open to work. Because otherwise, unless they're one looking you up or two, which shows on the export, how would they know that if you're working or not working?
Right.
Of course, your job would say you're working at this company, you ended at this time. But if you're showing it on your profile, what's the whoop? I guess is my big thing because it does help recruiters search to say if you do have LinkedIn Recruiter, who's open to work and who's out there looking for a job. And then so who are my passive candidates and who are my active candidates essentially. And even if you're recruiting them on LinkedIn and they didn't apply to your job, they're essentially a passive quote unquote candidate because you're going out to find
Right.
that talent. So I just don't understand still, as we sit here and have this
Right.
conversation, the mindset of a hiring manager that says if someone's not working, that must not be great talent. Because the fact of the matter is, and we've said this on other episodes, there is some really great talent out there. And people that I have worked with, I mean, way back when we were at Orbital, in Elmer. And I've seen people out there in the market. I actually just saw a post from someone that had to make a really hard decision based on their business to let go people. I think there was a couple salespeople, and I think there was some system administrators for Bullhorn that they will have available coming out, but they just had to make this really hard business decision. And they said, hey, I have some really great people that are now, I had to downsize. Would anybody be interested? He didn't give
Which
the
is
names.
amazing if a person does that and says,
Right. Yes.
unfortunately, let's go. Companies, people should do more of that, right?
Right. I was like, I have these great people. I had to downsize them. Nothing that they did. This is just a business decision. So, is anybody interested in having a conversation with this talent? I do think people should do way more of that. But also, based on reach, how many people is that actually getting to? And then now, if they go and put their open to work green banner up, and somebody go, they must not be great. Like,
Right.
that just, again, bonkers.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I've noticed a few times where I've seen an update from someone who is currently working, but they're in a contract, say, and that's going to end in a month or whatever, and they have a end date. So they put the banner on because they are actively looking for the next thing after that. And so that's something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because it makes me wonder, the people who don't want to talk to people who have the banner up because there's a perception of them being not great for whatever reason. Why are you letting other people decide that for you?
Right.
Because what you're essentially saying is that this person no longer works at XYZ company for whatever reason. Maybe they were downsizing, maybe they went out of business, maybe their department was laid off, whatever the case may be. Well, because of that, I can't hire them. How does that have anything to do with your business?
Right.
Because if they're a qualified person, all you're doing is agreeing to have a conversation with them,
Yeah,
right? And if
exactly.
you like them and they perform well and they have the skills, why wouldn't you hire them? Maybe you just got really lucky and found somebody who meets the criteria, who happens to not be working presently and is
Yeah.
open to working for you. Whereas if a year ago they might have been completely in career bliss over here at this other company, wouldn't have given you the time of day because they weren't interested. But if you hired them, maybe they would be that devoted to you. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And give you all of that energy. So that's what's confusing to me, is it's like you're letting some other company tell you who you should hire when in reality you have an opportunity. It's like the idea of like not dating somebody because they're divorced
Yeah.
or they are, if we're in a previous relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, why are they no longer in that relationship?
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
because they beat up their spouse or their partner? Okay, then maybe that's a person you don't want to be in a relationship.
Right.
But it's sort of the same idea, right? Or, you know, you don't go to a restaurant to have a meal because somebody had a bad meal there a year ago or whatever. Well, maybe they have a new chef, maybe they had a bad night, whatever. Like, I think we make all kinds of decisions in our lives that have nothing to do with other people's opinions. So why are we doing that with potential employees?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be like
Is that like too, am I being like too like
no, no.
esoteric about that?
I would agree. I would agree. What would be interesting is if you're working for a company and then they kind of stink a little bit, and then people start putting as active employees open to work on their banners.
Right. Well, that might be a
Then you could
problem.
really confuse the market, and then a
Right?
hiring manager would
Yeah,
be
maybe
like,
we should just tell everybody who is currently employed to put the banner up just to like rig the system so nobody knows.
I think rigging the system is a really good idea. I don't know. I'm all for it.
Like we all just rig it to say, put your green banner up, everybody, and nobody's gonna know who's who.
Yeah, just
I'll
everybody
put like
banners at
we'll
once.
put like little animal avatars in our pictures, you know.
It really doesn't make any sense to me to screen people out based on if they have an open to work or not, because I mean, there's so many different circumstances, and you know this just as well. There's layoffs that happen and downsizing that happens. There's environments where you're like, I just can't do this anymore. And the person leaves that environment, as crazy as it sounds. Everyone needs to work. Well, most people, unless you're a trust fund baby or something like that. But, you need to work,
Only. Yeah.
right? But there are times when you just walk away to say, I can't do this. This isn't the right environment or culture for me. So it has nothing to do with even a layoff. If you're not having the conversation with the person, how would you know?
Right.
How would you ever know what their purpose is, what their reason is, and how good they are? Because I'll tell you, I know there's people sitting at companies today. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it, that because maybe they're not performing as great, but because there's these other things alongside of it, that person's still sitting at the company looking to jump or looking to go. So it's not to say that someone sitting there in a seat is better than someone who is not sitting in a seat. It's just all how the chips fall. So I
Right.
just, again, I just don't understand it. When I left Clover and decided to kind of start my own things and do Osreen and do a little bit of the consulting stuff, I never put a green banner up, but that was just my choice because I felt like I was still doing stuff. I was still doing the
Right.
consulting. I was still doing and same thing with you. You've never put it up. You're doing some of the consulting stuff. You're having conversations, so you're technically
I'm
working.
thinking
But
after we get done with this, I'm putting it up.
all right, I
I've
want you
never
to put
put
it
it
up.
up.
We'll
And I'm
see.
like, maybe it will change my luck because
Yeah.
I can't seem to find full time work. So it would be great if that maybe that's the missing link.
Yeah, and I've seen people use it to their advantage, like where it works and people are contacting that person because they are open to work. So I've seen it kind of go both ways, but it still just blows my mind when someone thinks I'm going to screen these people out because they have that open to work banner. I mean, it's not, I know we got into like banner times within Facebook, right? And you can say, oh, I got this, or this is this is totally different.
Oh,
This
right.
is
Yeah, there was a lot of that, like people who
yeah,
were, it's in solidarity with
whatever it
whatever.
might be,
And
or like people
right.
are changing it. So I'm wondering also if some of the bias feeds from that, like
It could
because
be, yeah.
there's this other bias where if you're using banners on, let's say, Facebook, does that bleed over into LinkedIn somehow, some way, based on what people have seen? It could be an unconscious
Probably, you're
bias.
probably right because most people's first experience nowadays with social media was Facebook.
Yeah.
Most people today, most millennials, they weren't around for MySpace, Gen Z, all that. So I can see, that would be a bleed over from that for sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, I can see that there's an unconscious bias that may happen. So I mean, I've had candidates rejected for all kinds of reasons because of, they did a bulleted list of skills and some of the bullets had a period at the end and some didn't. Like
That's
crazy,
me all day.
crazy stuff.
Did I read
That was
it? Did I
crazy.
not? Did I?
And I'm like, okay, I get it that your attention to detail is there, but come on, let's calm down. But
Misspell. Like sometimes I look
but
at my resume, I'm like, I had something wrong the whole time. Because you read it so many
I've
times
done
and you
that too.
see it, like as a candidate, you're not even thinking about those things. Like you're just not.
Right,
So I
right,
don't hold
right.
it against anybody. They forget a period or like even if a word's out of context. But some people are such sticklers on the resume had it said this instead of
I know.
that. Like what?
I've found mistakes in my resume that I didn't realize were there until I parsed it into a resume system, into an ATS, and then it loaded, and I'm like, why is that there? It's the way I put it, and my bad, I didn't realize, but you can't always catch everything,
No.
especially spelling, because spelling, if it's not in context, and I'm the worst about finding other people's mistakes. I'm probably notorious for contacting people and saying there's something wrong on their website, there's a word wrong, and I always would notice it in like sales decks when
Yeah.
people would send us a sales presentation, and I would notice that there's a wrong word or misspelled word, and it's like I just can't not see it, and it's not like I'm trying to be an ass about it, but I probably come off that way, but I'm like, that word is spelled wrong. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
why didn't,
I'll
sorry, I
never
just
forget,
figured,
Danielle.
yeah.
I was doing this sales presentation deck or like, for a client. I don't even remember. And it was a draft and we were working through it. And I was doing the bullets on the PowerPoint. And I'll never forget Taryn says to me, because I had like capitals in some places, then lowercase, because it was just like she was like, would you
You were
pick
doing the
a
draft,
struggle?
right?
Like pick a struggle, Jennifer. How do you want to do these bullets? I'm like, fair enough. Fair enough. I'll change them.
Pick a side,
Pick a
pick a
side.
side,
Just pick
capital or no
one and
capital.
stick with it. I don't care which one. You just pick one and stick. I'm like, yeah, all right, that's a fair point. I will take that
Consistency. That's all
feedback and
we're
I will apply it.
now. And so sometimes it's made me really, like spend way too much time on certain things
Yeah.
because I'm like, is that right? Is that the right font size? Is that the right spacing? And it's like at some point you just have to be, I'm good. It's good. Let's
Yeah.
just leave it alone,
Good enough.
But
If someone wants to judge
or
me
like
for it,
when I
go
listen
ahead.
to people, when I listen to podcasts or I listen to audiobooks and somebody says a word wrong, that will drive me crazy. Like, and that's so annoying because people have different ways of saying things. It's not like there's one right way.
Yeah, or it's like
So people will say
data versus
something
data. Like, which way do you say?
Right.
I like to say
Tomato,
data. I
tomato.
think it makes it sound fancier.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
And I say data.
Beret. That's a normal one though, right? Someone says a beret.
Well, like people
What
say
about herb?
niche or niche, and I always say niche.
I say niche. I say niche.
Yeah.
What about what's another one? Well, tomato, tomato. I say tomato.
Right. There's a lot of them though, but there's some where people, and sometimes it's just regional, like people, especially people have learned English as a second language. Maybe
Yep.
they say things, and so I try not to be a jerk about it, but sometimes when you're listening, it just like it's one of those weird things that just sort of a pet peeve, I guess. And
Do
I
you
probably
think
say the wrong word all the time
would that
about
be a
them.
screen in, screen out? I don't know. Like if someone says salmon and we were like before I was married, if we're on a date, I don't know if I can let that fly. That's a screen out for
I
me
would probably,
in the
or
dating
somebody said,
pool.
yeah, yeah. I think it's, well, I can't, maybe, but I think also it would be in the context of like if they were Southern, because I think that's sort of a Southern way of saying something like that. I don't know.
I don't know. But if you order
I haven't run
salmon,
into that.
I'm getting up from the. I'm just
Salmon,
kidding.
because the L is very much silent in that word.
Just a silent.
Yeah.
It's a silent. But yeah. So, anyways, back to the green banners. To banner or not to banner? That is the question. I would say, okay, Danielle, you're going to change yours. So this is going to be our test run of what it looks like. We're going to do an
Right.
export to see, like, if someone's sending LinkedIn profiles. Probably should have done this before. I didn't even think about it. But if someone's sending LinkedIn profiles to a hiring manager, are they seeing it? Curious to know that as well. I don't know. I just feel like I've seen people have success using it. I know that it has called to my attention when I see someone that has it. I'm like, man, this person is a great person and they're looking. So, can I help connect them with someone or a job or things like that? So, I look at it as if I see it and I know the person and I know there's an opportunity, it's a connection point for me to make that connection
Yeah,
between that
that's true.
person and that job. So, I don't see the.
I think it's that idea too of like, I had my parents had always told me it's easier to find a job when you have a job.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's really true or if it's just more of like a myth or folklore or something, because it sort of seems like it should be easier to find a job when you have a job. But I don't think that's always the case for sure.
Mm-mm.
Because, to my point earlier, like you have more time to modify a resume or prepare for an interview or be available to interview if you're not working. So, that can all play a factor in how well you do in an interview too.
Yeah, I think so. Well, maybe it's you have nothing to lose, right? Well, because if you're working and someone contacts you and you have let's say you're shopping. I had a mentor, Jean. She used to always say, it never hurts to shop, right? So I would even
Right.
tell her, like, hey, so and so called me. I'm going to have a conversation with them. And the least that can come out of it is like get some good intel. What are they doing? What are they working
True.
on? What are their goals and objectives, right? And have that
Right.
conversation. So it never bothered her if I said, hey, I'm going to shop because I knew what I had in my leader and my mentor. I was not
That's
going anywhere
huge.
from
Yeah.
that. Yeah, from that standpoint. I mean, when I left in the first job that I worked without her, it was great because it was, with, my brain is just, what is the name we came up for this company? Anyways, I won't say the company. It was the first time, it was after Clover, the first time. Oh, Helix. That's what we called it.
Oh, that's what I was thinking, but I couldn't remember if that's what it was or not.
My brain just went boop. I had one of those boop moments. But when I went to
Because she'd
Helix,
left
that
the
was,
industry by then, right?
yeah, that was the first time that I hadn't followed her somewhere. And it was great. It was a great experience. I have no complaints about that, but it was after I had no longer reported to her because there was a couple times like at Elmer, I was reading something, by the way, and it said, I forget where this person worked. And she said she had I want to say it was 9 years. I think it was over 9 years or something like that. It was like seven different bosses. I was like, girl, I had nine bosses in 3 years at Elmer. Good luck.
Not right.
Yeah, no
Not
need to
right.
complain. That's not bad. Let me hold my
Yeah, it's
drink.
true.
Hold my drink. I'm gonna tell you a little something, something. But anyways, like it made me think, that was the first time. Well, there, I had not reported to her for a while, but then when she went to Clover, I followed her. And then eventually I didn't report to her because I went into a solutions role. And then I was recruited to go to Helix. So that was another place. Like for the first time, we were not the same part of the same organization or part of the same organization. So again, no regrets there. And then recruited from there to go to Med Trackers. You know, when I think about that, I don't know. But in your shopping and having a conversation, just like when I was interviewing for Med Trackers, I loved my job that I was doing. I had no complaints about it at Helix, but this opportunity came to run a full division. It was sales, it was operations, it was thought leadership, I had the whole kit and caboodle. How could you pass that up? And it was in healthcare
Right.
to
Right.
get that under my belt. So that was the only reason. But when I was interviewing, I was like, I have a great job. I don't necessarily need to leave it. I don't want to leave it. I love my team. So I think maybe
Right.
you do show up differently. Like you're not as nervous. You're not as, because if you don't have a job, you want to get that job, you want to secure it. And maybe you get a little bit more nervous. So that's why it's easier to find a job when you're
Yes.
working than
Yeah,
not.
that makes sense. You probably get a little, maybe you come off a little more desperate if you're looking for work, you
You're
know?
nervous, like you're worried about your words, you're overthinking it. So I don't even think
Yeah.
it's the desperation. I think it's I'm an overthinker by nature. So if
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
interviewing and I need this job, but I want this job, I'm going to overthink it every step of the way. And I might show up a little bit nervous. I might say something or worry about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. Where if I have nothing to lose, which technically you have nothing to lose if you don't have the job, but our mind gets the best of
Right.
us.
Right.
And then you start like,
Right.
you just don't show up as yourself. And I won't even say your best self. I just think you don't show up as yourself because you're so nervous, or especially let's say you've interviewed, I don't know, maybe you've had 8 interviews and you're
So you
not
need to like
employed.
take some Xanax or something and then then do the interview.
Take a chill pill, man, and just go kill it.
Exactly.
Like you got this. I had a conversation recently. It was I think I told you about this too, but it was when I was on the way back from the conference in Miami. And I had someone call me and she was telling me about this opportunity that she had. And I was so excited for her. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. Like, this is your full circle moment. I told her, this is your job. This is your full circle moment. And she went on to a website and started researching the company. And then she started thinking about, when I give my examples, should I align to their values and their mission and I said, you know what? You have gotten to this final interview by just being who you are. And you just went on this website to
Right.
figure out what the mission and values are. By the way, 2 out of those 5, like you're going to weave into your story organically. Stick to the most
Right.
important. I think it was trust and integrity was accountability. I think integrity was one, but anyways. So trust and accountability. With what you're doing in the job you're interviewing for, trust and accountability is number one. So as you're telling your story, that's going to come out. Don't get inauthentic about it. Don't overthink it. Just be exactly who you are, and that's what got you to this
Don't try to
place.
force it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's going to make them love you. And you haven't gotten this far by being somebody else and overthinking it. So why don't do it on this last one? Because the recruiter kind of got into her head a little bit and said, oh, this is what the person is looking for, and this is how the person's demeanor is. And I think it was all good intent. It was all prep work,
Right. Right.
but it caused her to kind of question herself a little bit. And I was like, don't do that. Don't do it, because you're
Right.
amazing at what you do. So anyways, she showed up as herself and she got the job, which was pretty cool. And so I was like, so how'd it go? I was waiting on my little pins and needles. I knew her interview was first thing in the morning. And she's like, a wise woman told me to be myself. And that's what I did. And just have the conversation. I was like, she nailed it. Now she was unemployed for a while, or she was working, but it was a job that, wasn't the job or in what she was going to school for and getting her master's for. So like, I think that's the biggest thing, whether it's you putting up a green banner or not, you're interviewing for a job or not. It's just be yourself. Remember what value you bring, and don't get nervous. Don't overthink it. Have the confidence that if I don't get this job, I know the value that I still provide. So what the hell do I got to lose? Just being me. Let me not overthink it. I don't know. I think that's the best advice I could give.
Yeah, and I think too, I don't know if men do that as much as women do. I think women, we're kind of relearning some of that because I think in our society, we can tend to be told that we need to not be ourselves
Yeah.
and be some other version of ourselves, and to that people may not like us if we're too much of ourselves, because maybe we're too much, we're too loud, too abrasive, too whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that comes from that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That, we've got to be nice and sweet and deferential. And, I'm so glad younger women are not getting that message in that way, that they're not, you know, buying into that
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Cause I think that's been the case forever,
Yeah. I mean, it goes back
so
to the polishing. We're just polishing you, Jennifer. Just a little bit. I'm like, I'm polished.
but I
Stop
don't want to be polished.
Stop it.
But
I
I'm
mean,
not going
some
to
of
be
it was
polished.
for good. I mean, good intent. There was some good
Oh,
feedback.
sure,
I'll
sure.
say that. I will say, like I said, didn't follow everything to the T. Hopefully, they're still proud of me right now. But when I think about that
Right.
piece of it too, and I used to hate this term, Danielle. Let me just be completely honest, because when I would read the imposter syndrome articles, and then there was this whole, I don't know if you were a part of this, but at Clover, there was this group, it was a women's group, and they would talk about this a lot. And I was like, I feel like you're building more anxiety for me by talking about this because I didn't really have it before. I didn't even want to see it.
They're like, now I have
Now
it.
I have it. Thanks a lot for that overthinking, tip. But it is a true thing. And I'll use this example. I met someone and they were working for this company. I won't say the name of the company, but they're working for this company. And I was thinking to myself, I had a little bit of the imposter syndrome. Does this person like me? Do they think I know what I'm doing? Are they going to be a deterrent as I think about this? And it was really funny when I had a conversation one-on-one with the person. They were like, all I kept doing, thinking about the first time I met you was how I was going to impress you with my background. And I'm thinking, I know what you've done. Like, I think you're a pretty cool person. I was worried about what you would think about me.
Right.
So,
Right.
anyways, I think we put too much into this about what does someone think about us? How do they view us? Because we're so hard on ourselves. I think as humans, we tend to be really, really, really hard on ourselves, from appearance to what does someone think as I'm saying these words, when you've been, kind of conditioned or taught those things. Do I put up the green banner or not? Kind of going back to that. What will someone think? Does it really matter in the whole big
Yeah.
scheme of things? No, just be who you are and do what you want to do. And you're going to learn. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have some wins. You're going to have some losses. And you take each one of them and you just, I don't know, you move forward with it.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I've had that experience of somebody telling me like, "Oh, you're really impressive. You're, this," and I'm like, "I am?" Like, and then you kind of feel like, "Oh, well maybe I am. I don't know." Like, because you're just out here trying to do your thing and trying to survive day to day, and but I'll use a really weird example here. So I was recently listening to the audiobook for Leslie Jones, the comedian.
Okay.
And she's a big personality, right? She's a comedian. She's been in a lot of movies, TV shows. She was on SNL. I always thought she was hilarious. But she talks. She's very candid about stuff that's happened to her in her life, and how she's struggled as a Black woman, as a woman in general, as being a woman who's bigger. She's like 6 feet tall. She has a big personality, and how a lot of times places would want to kind of like contain her,
Mm.
like and like she got to a point where she just stopped worrying about having like perfect hair and all that kind of stuff. And she even says, like, when Lorne Michaels hired her for Saturday Night Live, he was like, "You're the person I needed that I didn't know I needed."
Yeah.
Like, I don't know exactly what to do with you yet, but I didn't know I needed you until I saw it. And I was like, that kind of feels kind of like where I'm at in a weird way. Like, I feel like I know that I have value and I can bring a lot to the table, but I almost feel like sometimes people don't know what to do with me. And it's like, do I have to try and show that, convince them? But like she talks about that a lot, like, how her struggle to be heard, and and then she kind of wraps it up by saying that she got where she is because she worked really hard and she believed in herself. And she'd be like, "I'm Leslie effing Jones," like she really just sort of owns who she is now. And I'm like, that is so awesome that she but it took her a long time to get there,
Mm-hmm.
and we all kind of need to do that and be like, hey, this is not that you have to be hostile about it or angry or be in anybody's face, but you need to kind of own who you are and realize that who you are has value, and the right people, the right places will see that,
Yeah.
theoretically.
Yeah, I think that's, it
Although when
weaves
you're in a
through.
long-term job search, it's very hard to
It
feel that way
is.
sometimes.
That it is tough. Like, but I think that weaves through life. Like, I had a conversation with my mom last night. We were on the phone for a while, and I was having one of my days where I was just like, like the weight of the world. It feels like it's on my shoulders, and I'm trying to fill the packets for
Right.
us, right? And I'm trying to, which I have help. Richard does help me, and then Caleb, if I say, hey, I need to stick some stickers on these, he'll do it. But then, working, you're just doing all the things at the same time. And I was just having one of my moments, and we were talking, and we were talking about like the perfectionist syndrome I have. Oh man, the perfectionist thing. And she said, I don't know where you got that from, Jennifer. Like, I don't know why you always felt like you had to be perfect. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's because these things like throughout were kind of woven into my life. And if I think about that, it was my own pressure I put on myself. It was my own doing. I think, I was telling her, like, sometimes your circumstances around you do make you kind of think in that way, I would say. But it's you who puts that on you. It's you, like, and then other people by saying things or whatever it might be. I mean, going back to
You
green bag, you shouldn't
internalize
put up the green.
that
You
and like,
internalize it, right? And then you shift who you are. Then you become uncomfortable in who you are, and everything just kind of unfolds from there. But being able to just say, okay, this is who I am, and not in a okay, so there's people that say it that are just jerks. Let's just be honest. Like, this is who I am.
hey,
I'm a jerk.
that's
Well,
what it
fine.
is.
Be who you are, but I don't want to be around you. That's totally fine.
Right.
But I think that there's this period of, especially as we age and get older, there's this period of self-reflection to say, who am I? What does that look like? I think you and I have been through this period of time where I'm going to say it's fortunate, Danielle. I'm going to say it's fortunate to be able to step away from everything in the world and just really think about, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? What does that look like going forward, especially at this place in life? And then saying, I want to create something that looks differently. Like, if you're talking to me in my 30s, maybe even, I don't know. I think once I hit 40, it was a little bit different. But if you're talking to me in my 30s, I'm going to say, I want to be this huge powerhouse. I'm in the C suite. I'm running the whole show, which I did. I did it, and I did it
Right.
successfully. But then I got there and
Right.
said, I'm kind of tired. I don't want to be this person. I don't want
Well,
to
yeah,
get
because you
kicked in
don't
my
know what
face
you
all
don't
day.
know, and you think that's gonna be the thing, and you don't really necessarily want that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like, I don't want to be kicked in my face all day. I don't want to, like, I would put again some undue pressure on myself to always perform. If it wasn't good, it wasn't good enough for me. Like, I had this thing, and someone said when I was at this conference with the people that I work with, they're like, how did you get this lady? She's a powerhouse. And I was thinking to myself, that's what someone thinks. All right, well, I'll go with it. I'll go with it. But it was
Right.
cool to kind of like reflect here, and then coming into this stage and this place where I'm enjoying and loving, what I'm doing. And then, still put the pressure of, okay, the small business, what am I doing with that? And then we have the Worksties that we do and things like that where we're finding our identity. It's pretty cool. So again, my best advice would be, do what the hell you want to do. Put up your green banner. Don't put up your green banner. Put up that LinkedIn post that you think is going to that speaks your mind and speaks your truth, because you only get one shot to be you, and this is it. I don't know.
No, I agree with that, and I was going to tell you too. I've heard it said that perfectionism is a trauma response
Hmm.
to like childhood trauma or trauma we had as young adults or whatever. That's a way of controlling things because you were felt out of control in a situation,
That makes sense.
which I'm sure we all have. And I'm like, yeah. And when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. As much as I would hate to like admit that, but yeah, that makes sense. And over the years, I've had to let some of that go in a certain amount of way, certain way, just because, once you're married and stuff, like you can't have control over everything. But anyway, um, Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, I remember years ago when I was in my 20s, I had a lady that I work with, and she turned 40. And there was a bunch of us like at a meeting, and she was talking about like the fact that she had turned 40. And then, we are all kind of like, what's that? Which is crazy, but we were like, and she was just like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm just going to speak my mind. I'm going to do what I want to do and everything. And I was so like, wow, how does she get away with that? Like that's, and I mean, within reason, right? I'm sure she wasn't like, with a bullhorn
It
in
wasn't carte
public
blanche, you
spaces.
know, there was a little bit of editing.
Right, right. But, at the same time, I get it. Like when you get older, you start to go, your time becomes more valuable. You're not willing to spend, even if it is like work hours, you don't want to necessarily spend those hours doing something you don't love,
Yeah.
or get, some sort of satisfaction out of it. And sometimes you have to because you have family and responsibilities and, just even yourself that you have to clothe and feed and put a roof over your
Mm-hmm.
head. So, all of that said, if you can find something else on the side that makes you happy or whatever. But it's exhausting, if you have to do that because the day job doesn't fulfill you and you
Yeah.
have to start a side gig to do something else to be more, and I saw my dad deal with that. My dad was an artist. He was a really good artist. He went to art school, got his, master's in fine art, and he couldn't make a living at it. Most artists can't. He got married, had children, and so he had to work. And so his downtime was spent pursuing his art, and that was satisfying to him. But, I'm sure he was probably more conflicted than I realize now, because he had to kind of, you know, be a provider, but then he also wanted to do his art and maybe get paid for it and stuff too. So,
Yeah, there was
you
this
know,
book that I can't think of the name of it, but it basically talks about your career on a bell curve. I'll have to look up the name. So go in the comments what it is.
I
But
think I'm familiar
I
with
think
this. Yeah.
I
Keep
told you
going.
about the book when I was reading it. And it talks about like your career on a bell curve. So when you get into this, your high point of learning. Okay, so there's people that stay within organizations at their high point of learning, past their bell curve. And they're not at that point, when you're on your way down, you should be knowledge transferring, giving people the keys to do the job and things like that, right? Helping nurture others that are
You
up
should
and
be
coming
more in
that
a
should.
mentorship type role.
Yeah, right. And that's what this is about. And it talks about like college athletes, and I think about Caleb, right? So they reach this peak in their college athletic career, or sometimes they get to the NFL and they're able to play there and things like that. But then after that, they're like, okay, that was my career, that was my peak. Now what do I do? And they get lost, right? So how do you transfer that knowledge? What's your next step within that? They may or may not have earned a degree in college, but do they go on to do coaching and things like that? And I think about that to the corporate world. And we've talked about people that have been in the roles for a really long time that have reached that peak, but don't want to kind of transition and knowledge transfer and mentor, and they still want to control that world so they can stay working and they can have a job and things like that. I think that's such an important thing to recognize, like where you are in your career as well, to say, and you might accelerate there faster. So I don't think we're on a traditional trajectory when I think about growth and careers and things of that nature, because you might gain all of this knowledge. Think about how fast we're learning everything, how fast AI is coming. I mean, now we have AI, which combines your predictive and combines your generative, so agentic AI. So when you think about your agentic, that does all your tasks and things like that, your task based. And I sent you the video yesterday where the guy made his avatar like the Jetsons. I thought that was so cool. Like he had to be there, but it was talking for him and stuff like that. But I think about how fast and the speed in which we're learning, and we continue to learn. So I think there's people in roles, and there's that as they age, they continue to learn, they continue to evolve, they continue to do those things. But I don't know if it's career based or like, what do I want to say, skill based, specification based, based on what they're doing, to where you can become the stagnant person, and then you're kind of on your bell curve down. So I think really understanding that too in your career is important, to say, when I was in my 30s, I wanted to really just get up there and I wanted to climb. That was my goal. I wanted to run everything. I wanted to be that person. And then now as I come into it, my focus is I still don't mind running everything, but I want to pass my knowledge to others, right? And teach them the world and things like that. So, how do you evolve as you move throughout your career and your life cycle? And then you go into consulting or whatever. I've seen a lot of people that are at retirement age becoming career coaches. I feel like there's more career coaches than ever now. Do you feel like
Yeah.
that? Like I see a lot of them on LinkedIn, right?
Right.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a really good something to consider because I think it's true. And I think that there's probably a lot of reasons why some of that happens. I think probably a lot of it too is that we're sort of the product of our mothers having been in the workforce. You know, like when we were kids, it was more started to become more normalized that women would work outside of the home. And that hadn't really necessarily, and I had a lot of friends when I was a kid whose mothers didn't work. But then if you had divorced parents or even parents who were together, most of them did work in some way. So maybe that's something that we might have seen in previous generations because there was just more men in the workplace. And now that there's men and women, maybe that kind of looks different. I don't know. But I do agree with that. And I think that, but also I think too, the way that corporations have shifted, there's less of an emphasis on middle management, where it's like executive level, some managerial, and then like the worker, you know, working
Mm-hmm.
portion of the business. And there used to be more like, we can see this how it's changed at companies we've been at, where there's whole departments that have just been dissolved, and then those people moving that are left are kind of filtered into the workforce in a different way. And so I'm wondering if, and you lose a lot of that historical knowledge. Lose
Yeah.
that because it's not even just historical knowledge about the company, but about that life experience and people who can kind of explain to you where they've been or when they've gone through certain things. And I think that's really unfortunate. But I think that's probably part of how our workforce has sort of shifted, in a lot of ways too, is just that there aren't people in those types of roles that used to maybe be there.
Yeah, but I built a model. This is back at Clover. We had, so the companies, one was John Deere. I think if I remember, we built one for Intel. But what it was is if they were I don't know, alum, let's just call it an alum, right? They used to work there and they had certain skill sets. They went into this talent pool that you could actually pull from. So let's say, you retired from the company and maybe it's an older technology that they're merging and bringing in a new technology, but you need the data export, you need the expertise and the experience that went with that older technology. You can actually tap those workers to come back in and work as like a consultant that after they retired, if they were interested, they're retired. It's up to them, right? They're an alum. They may or may not want to come back, but they kept tabs on those people for that very reason. Daniela, was for the knowledge transfer piece. And I feel like that is so smart. And I don't understand why more companies don't do that. Because even if you move on, let's say I'm thinking about the last one, I'm thinking about it, Chloe, right? It moved on. But I hold so much knowledge still. What worked, what didn't work,
Didn't
what
work.
was
Yeah.
trying to be implemented, what didn't make in the whys behind it. So when the person leaves that's sitting in that seat, whether it's, by choice or it's by retirement or whatever it might be, for a myriad of reasons, let's just say. If you could tap that person back and say, hey, tell me about this, as long as they didn't leave on a horrible note, right? As long as
Right.
they would still have the best intentions for the company. Let me just tee that up. You still have to care about that company, which I think everywhere that I've worked, I don't think there's a place where I'd be like, meh. I would never talk to them about what I did. I've enjoyed everywhere that I've been. Some, I might have had hard times at some, but I still love that company. I was a part of it. So I always want to see it succeed. That's just who I am innately. I think you're the
Yeah.
same person. Like, don't you want to see, like, everywhere you've been, you want to see those people
Oh yeah, I
succeed
mean, and
today?
if any of those companies came back to me and offered me an opportunity that aligned with what I was interested in, I would absolutely consider it.
Right.
Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Yeah.
You know, so.
So why
But I do agree. I think what you're okay. Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
no, so what I'm saying is why just let people exit? Let's say even if let's just go retirement. Okay, I get companies, they think you go to a competitor, oh no, you stole all the information and the competitive intel, whatever. Not true. But anyways, why did they just
Most other
let
companies
that
don't give a crap.
knowledge exit? It just doesn't make much sense to me.
I agree with that. And because I sort of feel like I'm going to go back to the cultural thing here again, because I think in other cultures, and I just mean like outside of United States of America, we have more, there is more respect for elders. And, you have like combined families where, grandparents live with, grandchildren, and like there's more of a, it's intergenerational,
Mm.
like layered, right? In that way, like that video I showed you that I sent you of like, these people who built a house and then there was a whole other apartment kind of next
I
door
thought that
for
was so
in-laws or
cool. Like, I
something.
want my
And I was like,
mom to have the
that's an
main house and I'm in
amazing,
the little apartment.
right. Or like, you could have like
Lumber
your
shark.
son could live
And
there, like it's,
yeah.
or you could rent it out or whatever. But I feel like that is sort of represents the idea that companies have of not respecting the knowledge or respecting the elders, if you will.
Mm,
Like if saying
yeah.
like, oh, they've been here forever, they need to go, right? Or they were here forever before they left, like what do they have to give us, right? And I think your point is right. Like there's I remember when we were at Elmer and talking to someone there who we were discussing a problem that we were trying to solve for. And this other woman that I worked with had been there a lot longer than I had, and she mentioned like, yeah, we tried to do that back in whatever year and it went this way. And I was like, that's good to know, because we could have, if she hadn't been there, the rest of us might have tried to do that. And that's not to say that it wasn't a good idea when they tried it, but it just for whatever reason didn't work. And so the situation would have to be very different or approached in a very different way
Yeah.
in order to be successful, because it didn't work that way. So I think sometimes what people may do is say, oh, like her comment could have been seen as like that's negative. Like we don't want somebody who's going to be a naysayer. But in actuality, all she was saying is like, we did try this and it didn't work, and this is why. And maybe that reason is still valid, and so she kind of would have helped save the company resources, right? Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily monetarily, but like the effort of all these people. So I think that there's a lot to be said. And I remember when we were there too, the president did like a call where he would do a presentation quarterly or whatever, sort of on the state of the business. And I remember so distinctly one time him saying, we're getting away from like having the historical knowledge
Yeah.
of like, we don't necessarily like, we want to be new ideas, whatever. And and I was like, what he's saying is that we don't need middle management anymore. We don't need legacy people here anymore.
Mm.
And I thought that was very short sighted.
Yeah.
And that kind of explains exactly what they ended up doing. They ended up operationally changing fundamentally their whole workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was the right thing at the time, but over the long term, I think that's very short sighted because of that exact reason. You lose people who have been there, gone through the paces to say, like, yeah, we did something like that. And this is how I think we could approach it to do better this time, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But you do lose something by not having that as part of the workforce.
I agree. So like when someone reaches that bell curve and they're coming down, how do you reposition them within the organization? Because one, they have a lot of historical knowledge. Two, they can give you information to say this is why it didn't work. So maybe if we thought about it differently, or if you're a problem solver, right? They can tell you the why. This is what we tried, it didn't work. Maybe they don't know why, I don't know. But at least you have that
Right.
historical information to say, okay, it didn't work. Let's think through all of the paces of why it didn't work or potential reasons. They're going to have some of those. And then you can create a different solution to that, or say, wait, let's try it this way instead to see if it works. And even when you're putting stuff in and you're implementing it, you're like, well, it may or may not work, right? Ideally it does, but then we'll adjust it as we go. I think there's a way to make sure that you're retaining knowledge in a way, and you don't have to just necessarily say, all right, you go hit the streets.
You're out.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
go.
no,
Good
and
luck.
because I think too,
Happy
when
retirement.
people see that, right? And I think too, when people see people leaving the organization who a couple years ago were seen as highly valuable, and maybe they've been pushed out or encouraged to retire early or whatever. I think that that creates a weird situation, weird in the sense of like an uncomfortable situation with
Mm-hmm.
people who stayed behind, because they're like, this person was bringing up concerns or issues. Should I not do that then? Am I going to get pushed out if I make those same observations, or if I say, hey, we tried this 5 years ago and it didn't work for these reasons? Am I gonna have to be a get along, like go along to get along kind of
Yeah.
situation? And I think that creates a whole other set of issues, because you don't have people voicing their concerns or saying, I don't think that's gonna work, you know?
Yeah.
And
I
I know
think
we've definitely seen that.
yeah, we have. When I think about like people that have, if I'm implementing something, gave me the warnings or heeded the warnings, I've always appreciated them. And the one thing, all right, I'm going to say my driving crazy point is when someone comes from one organization to another, organization A to organization B, and their constant point of reference is, what organization A we did, da, 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 da. Well, you're not at A anymore, you're at B. So can you just
Right.
bring that experience without saying, all of those things, because I'm not trying to be the next whatever, maybe company that they came for or
Right.
whatever else. And it was hard for me too, because I would always think in that way. Well, if it was a big company, we had a lot of cool things, right? At company A, we did this. Well, I'm not a company A. So I'm at company B, and I got to figure out how to make their processes more efficient, how to make their teams look different, how to look at performance and things of that nature. So it was always different in every place that you went to. So I think there's also something to be said for when you have that competitive intel and knowledge and you're going from A to B, how do you position it and how do you talk about it internally? Because at some point people get fatigued with company A, like, here they come
Yeah,
again.
that's very true. And
They
I think
want to
it's
make
one
it
of
the
those
new,
things too
what
where,
are
well, and
they
it's one of
achieving
those
high
things too where
growth?
you
Are
can
they? Yeah.
say, yeah, like, oh, I think if we, what, and I know I've probably been guilty of doing just exactly that,
I've done it.
but I
I'm
think
not
I,
saying I am an
oh,
innocent
oh, I'm
party
sure
in
we've all
this.
done it. Yeah. So it's just one of those things
Yeah.
to say, like, well, it's been my experience when I've done this before is this, and even stating like it's not necessarily the best way to do it, but this is how it was done, and I think we could use some of that same idea and transfer, because there's good and bad no matter where you are.
Yeah.
There's always, when I was at, Clover, I was like, can we go back and do what we were doing at Elmer, because that was like actually a good idea,
Right.
like in terms of like contract negotiation and oversight and things like that. That was like, I can't believe we're not doing that. And so
Although career builder handed me my
there's,
ass, man. I let
yeah, so
bygones be
like
bygones.
there is, yeah, so there's good and bad no matter where
I
you
like
are.
Monster better.
And
Whatever.
right. Yeah, so yeah, it's just one of those things where, every company does things differently, but it's whatever they're doing isn't necessarily the right
Yeah.
way. And so what I've always tried to tell people is like, you were hired for a reason. And and unless what your reason for being hired is completely different than what you're putting your opinion on, you should bring your opinion forward,
Yes. Yeah.
because you have value in that way. And that's not like to say that you should run over anybody or go above someone or whatever. Just say like, hey, I was thinking about this and I'm a little concerned because I've seen this done before, and I just want to make sure that we're covering all bases, or whatever. Frame it however you want.
Yep.
But like, if that's part of your role, you want to make sure that you're voicing that, because you don't want to be 6 months down the road and be like, well, I kind of thought this wasn't going to work out. And they're like, why didn't you say
Why didn't you
something?
say
Well, I
anything?
didn't know you wanted my opinion. Well, I'm paying you, right? Like, that's your opinion comes with, so yeah,
Yeah. I completely.
very complicated.
It is. Like, what was interesting? All right. So I know we're going to wrap in a minute, but when I went back to, or we went back to Clover, and I asked for, it was a strategy plan, like a sourcing plan, and it was on the same template that I had created like 10 years prior. I'm like, no one has evolved this, because every
Guys are
time we
still
go
doing
somewhere
this,
else, you recreate, but you also enhance it, and it gets better and it
right?
gets better and it gets better. Like, remember like the templates we were creating at Elmer for the sourcing strategies and things like that, and then went to the next place, which was, Clover. Then you sat there and we enhanced that. And I think about the program maturity models I always do too, where I'm always recreating new languages for them. I think I'm on language number, if I think about it, probably 5 now or 4. It's 4 or 5 for the language that I'm just recreating. But I'm also enhancing it and putting it around whatever the services deliverables are of the current organization. So you have to change it, you have to shift it. But to your point, like when you go to the next place, it's about taking that knowledge, enhancing that knowledge, and saying, let me create something even better for this next place. And then, when you look back, it's not proprietary information that you created and you just gave it to this other person. It's something that you have recreated again and again and you've honed in because that's one of your skills that you have, right? You're always evolving.
And then the market changes, the places you go for candidates changes, evolves, whatever.
It blew my mind. I was like, was that good? We did that.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, because when I left Elmer, I went to a different company and there was somebody there that I work with who had been at Clover before. So her frame of reference was so different. And so I was like leaps and bounds ahead of what they had been doing. So of course she took my ideas, but whatever,
Bygones being bygones, just like with me with Career Builder.
Yeah. Like, well, all right. So
I'll forgive him because of Cher. That's the only reason that is forgiven.
Right. For sure.
Because we got to see Cher.
There was.
I mean,
Caesar's Palace, baby.
That's right. All right, you want to stop there?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
I'm glad we got to cover this.
Yeah, me too. It's a good conversation. All right, so this episode is sponsored by socialjobs.com. I'll let you pick up from there, Danielle.
So check them out if you are an employer looking to source in a social media space for candidates. Like, follow, subscribe, comment, share. If you haven't caught up on all of our episodes, feel free to go back and watch the old ones. And our monthly job market tea, we've got January and February out as well.
Yeah, we are on all your favorite listening portals. You can buy us a cup of coffee at the link below. There's also a link to shop Ozreen. And with that, until next time, bye.
Bye.